Hello, my name is Eris Thomas. This screencast by the Robinson Writing Center will cover in-text citations in both prose and poetry. To start off, let's talk about what in-text citations are and why we use them. When quoting or paraphrasing information, you have sources that you get that information from. The sources should be in your bibliography, but the reader won't know which source corresponds with whatever quote they're reading. In-text citations allow the reader to understand which quote comes from which source. MLA format is the most commonly used citation style, so we'll go over how that works. MLA uses parenthetical citations and the author page method. Parenthetical citations are handy because they put the basic source information right after the quote or paraphrase, but aren't as long as the actual bibliography source. By the way, paraphrases are when you say what the author says without using quotations. They still need to be cited though. When doing MLA citations, the author page method requires that you include the author's last name and the source page number you got the information from. The author's last name doesn't necessarily need to be in the parenthetical citation at the end, as long as it's somewhere in the sentence. It's usually put before the quote if it isn't in the parentheses. By doing this, the reader can find the author in the bibliography by their last name, and then find the author's work that you got the information from, and read or even cite it themselves if they want to. Here are some examples of basic in-text citation using the author page method. Notice that each one includes the author's last name and the page number, even though the last name isn't always in the parentheses, and one of the examples is a paraphrase instead of a quotation. Also, neither of these quotes are standalone quotes. Quotations read better when you integrate them into a sentence, so you should always try to avoid having a sentence begin with a quote. You might be wondering why the example quotations didn't include punctuation. This is a common concern, so we'll go over that now. Unless the quote itself ends with a question mark or exclamation point, the quotation shouldn't have any punctuation at the end of it. Commas and periods are okay to keep as long as they're in the middle of the quote. If the quote ends with a question mark or exclamation point, you should keep it in the quotations though. Always put the punctuation after the parenthetical citation. Parentheses can also end with commas if you're continuing the sentence after the quotation. Here are some examples of when you should put punctuation at the end of the quote. There are exceptions, of course. Here are some of the more common ones. If you want to cite multiple sources, but the authors have the same last name, include their first initial in the parenthetical citation. If they happen to have the same initial, include their full names. If you want to cite one work that has multiple authors, include both names with an "and" in between them. If your work has 3 or more authors, include the first author's last name and replace the others with "et al." as shown in the last example. And, if you want to cite multiple works that are all by the same author, include the title of each work in the parenthetical citation. If you still want to include the author's last name in the parenthetical, you would start the parenthetical with the last name followed by a comma, followed by the title, followed by the page number, as shown in the last example. There is a difference between citing article titles and book titles in text. Articles should have the title in quotations in the parenthetical, while books should have the title in italics without quotations around it. When citing short pieces of poetry, usually 3 lines or less, line breaks should be indicated with a // and author page number format should be used. Author line format is exactly like author page format, but there are typically more lines than there would be pages, so use of dashes to abbreviate large numbers are more frequently seen. Longer poetry quotations should be indented a ½ inch, and the parenthetical citation should be kept after the closing punctuation, unlike prose citations. To recap, let's go over some of the most important things to remember. Parenthetical citations must always be after the quotation, and they can't have any punctuation aside from commas in them. They should be before the closing punctuation. Quotations usually don't end with any punctuation, unless there's a question mark or an exclamation point. Citing works with 3 or more authors is only different in that you replace all but the first author's names with et al. This is to let the reader know that there are more than one author. Citing short pieces of poetry is similar to citing prose, but in-text citations for many lines of poetry requires that the quotation be indented and separated from the rest of the sentence. I hope this screencast helped you understand how to cite in-text and prose.